Bonjour, hello. We're all on Zoom now and pre-recordings. I put as a little introduction some bird song from a cardinal, a bird that is frequent here in North America and that you can hear especially now in the spring, and which takes me directly to the topic of this paper written with colleagues from the United States, Canada, UK and Germany on the interrelation of social innovation and biodiversity crisis. Our starting point was an important development, and that is in parallel to the climate platform, there is now also an intergovernmental science policy platform on biodiversity, which has published its first global assessment on biodiversity in 2019, with the lead question, is the world on track to meet the global goals for nature and sustainability? Unfortunately, the world isn't. The report summarizes it with a claim that 1 million species are at risk of extinction, or to put it back to this little cardinal here, which I took from a recent IPBES tweet, because this yellow cardinal is very rare, 1 in a million occurrence of a bird that's usually red. And to take this as my metaphor, the report suggests at currently we are on track that we're turning the red cardinal and many other birds, insects and other species such a ultra rare genetic mutation as this yellow cardinal. The report analyzes this in relation to 5 direct drivers of ongoing unsustainability: land use change, exploitation of organisms, climate change, pollution, and invasive species. And it ends on a positive note, calling for a pathway of transformation for sustainability, where social innovation also features, and that is what caught our attention. More specifically, if you read the report, there's effectively 2 phases of innovation. On the one hand, technological innovation appears as a problem. Think of large dams and their interruption of riverine ecosystems. But innovation also appears as a solution alongside technological ones. But that is never really spelled out. So there's no definition of social innovation, and it's also not explained how this social innovation links to solutions discussed in reports, such as recognizing indigenous peoples, which are especially important for biodiversity protection. So basically, we said what is important here is to study how is social innovation conceptualized in the context of transformation for sustainability research. How does social innovation research tackle the drivers of unsustainability as identified by the IPBES? And how is the concept of social innovation contested or questioned? Remember this kind of Janus-faced aspect of innovation in the report. We did this via a systematic review that basically was done during the first lockdown, where we went through the web of science looking for social innovation in relation to the direct drivers of the IPBES report. And because of this contestation aspect, we did the same topic also for exnovation and synonyms such as terminating practices and discontinuities. This yielded about 900 papers, discounting the double one, 770 unique papers, which are clustered by these different direct driver topics. I cannot go into the details of the different drivers. We do that in our paper. However, I'd like to give you an idea of our main findings. So with respect to our first research question and the conceptualization of social innovation in this context, we find that social innovation is very much discussed as a meso-level phenomenon, focused on specific regions and with some macro links in relation to the societal trends and some micro links to specific actors and networks. The involvement of citizens as informants, users, participants is a reoccurring core issue across these different themes. Much of social innovation is about the practice and often the promise of better including citizens in sustainability issues. And therefore, we think that grassroots innovation, as originally introduced by Seyfang and Smith, might be the best way to capture what's going on in terms of social innovation in relation to our topic. Second, how does social innovation tackle the drivers of unsustainability identified by the IPBES and associated underlying causes? Our review suggests that the prevailing solutions approach is local experimentation, including exchange and learning via networks. There is unfortunately very little evidence for research recognizing and respecting indigenous people. Throughout, the review suggests that social innovation with its frequent basis in affluent cities, so that's where presumably also a lot of the researchers are based, addresses underlying causes of these drivers, in particular hegemonic ideas of production and consumption. Finally, there is a kind of cautionary note regarding transformation. So while the report wants to introduce this idea of a transformation in direction of sustainability, much of the transformation language in these articles means by transformation the ongoing unsustainability transformation that is urbanization, industrialization, climate change. So there is an important not to get confused about this, because then what does this mean in practice? It means, for example, that we find an interesting discussion of transformative adaptation, where the discussion is about how can communities adapt to the ongoing unsustainability transformation. At the margin, there is also a discussion of real alternatives, but that is, as I said, at the margin. Thirdly, how is the concept of social innovation contested or questioned? Throughout, there's a very positive balance of social innovation in these articles, very little evidence of critical discussions, and this topic of social exnovation, of ending practices, terminating policies remains really very marginal in spite of its evident potential for transformation for sustainability. We could conclude with some suggestions for the research on social innovation for sustainability in terms of three relations that emerged for us during our discussion of these articles. Social innovation and technology is very often emerging as a complementary topic, and technology and change in social practices, but often with the idea of social innovation following the technical lead. Think of the smart city topic. So we suggest here, do we need more demand-driven technical innovation? So starting with a social problem rather than the other way around. Second, social innovation, nature-based solutions. There is an emerging topic of natural and modified ecosystem, third natures, especially in cities. So this is a really important development. And we suggest that social innovation here might contribute more sensitivity to where and for whom such solutions are developed, who has a say and who benefits. Thirdly, social innovation in governments remains an important but often black box topic. If citizens and civic organizations are important, what are their different roles and how can their participation be recognized and validated in what Elinor Ostrom calls the polycentric governance of these collaborative schemes? And in that also, what is the value of dissent and social struggle? Finally, as we had noted, social innovation is very much dealt with as a positive buzzword, and therefore there's a lot what we suggest in the article. There's a risk to include the irrelevant, so the mere use as a buzzword of social innovation, and to exclude the relevant, that is research streams that speak about the change in social practices, but don't use this terminology, notably, for example, the degrowth and post-growth traditions. So that's something that requires much more attention and shows, of course, also the limits of our method. Whereas we think with this kind of more critical approach, social innovation research can make a good contribution, especially to this idea in the report that visions of the good life are a key lever of point of transformative change, because it allows the study of viability and challenges of such change via the studies that social innovation research actually is doing. So this, very briefly, was this overview. If you would like to read the whole paper, do not hesitate to get in touch, and see you at the conference.